Good afternoon, I'm Melissa Sowerwine. I am a director at IDS International, and IDS Technology is a part of IDS International, which is where our cyber and information warfare division is born.
So good afternoon, I'm Amanda Lockwood. I'm the president of IDS Technology. So like Melissa said, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of IDS International.
I'll show you.
So before coming to IDS, I spent 9 years in the Marine Corps. The first 5 of that was with SIGINT and EW at 1st Radio Battalion, and then after that I came up to Mark IV Cyber, where I was an offensive cyber operator up here at Fort Meade. So after leaving the Marine Corps, I came directly to IDS. They were building out a really great information warfare platform, and during the course of building out that platform, they realized that cyber was very closely related to information warfare, and so they started bringing in people like me and one of my coworkers from here at Fort Meade to enhance their cyber capabilities as well. So information warfare. So information warfare isn't new. It's been going on for centuries, but now it has an increased reach and scope because of new technologies and just the amount of information that individuals are consuming on a daily basis. So this allows just everyday citizens in any country around the world to be exposed to things like propaganda, to be under influence campaigns from foreign militaries trying to spread fear and anger. They also use the information environment to even go as far as stoking genocide and perpetuating genocide, like we've seen in Myanmar. So it is something that's really serious that has become even more of a problem recently. So I'm going to briefly talk about some of the recent information campaigns and how these things have been impacting us over the last couple of years, and then we will go through and talk about how that converges with cyber and the electromagnetic spectrum and how we can train for all of these different pieces of the information environment together. So when you look at Russia, I think it's probably the one that most people have heard the most about. It's all over the news. We have seen reports from our Department of Justice looking at the events that the campaigns that Russia is trying to conduct in our country to target U.S. citizens, U.S. politicians, and spread their messaging there. So their information operations in convergence with cyber actually go back way farther than the 2016 U.S. elections. So they've been doing information operations for decades, for longer than that, and they were pretty adept at it, and then realized that cyber and the electromagnetic spectrum are going to be tied in as well. So they have been using this confluence of the different tools since at least 2008 in Georgia. So when Russia looks at information operations, they look at it from 2 perspectives. They look at it from the technical side, and then they look at it from the information side. So with the technical side, that's very closely aligned to what we consider cyber and the electromagnetic spectrum, things like SEMA, offensive and defensive cyber ops. And then the information is everything that's kind of lives in that, all the people using these platforms, their opinions, the actions that they're going to take, and the data that they're sending back and forth, and the ideas that they're sharing there. So with these things in mind, they looked at Georgia, and ties very much to what's happening today. They kicked off their operations with a pretty aggressive information campaign that spread across the world. Even U.S. news sites, major news sites, and U.S. politicians in 2008 were initially saying, like, yeah, this makes sense, Russia's justified, I don't think this is out of line. And that pretty quickly turned, and obviously it was not the case. And so Georgia realized how serious, obviously an existential threat to them. And so they went beyond military capabilities and also reached out to the private sector, to marketing firms and advertising agencies to figure out how to get their message out there and say, like, hey, what you're hearing from Russia, they're dominating the airwaves, that's not actually right. Here's the situation, here's what's happening. And they pretty quickly turned the international sentiment against the Russian invasion in Georgia. So from there, Russia took some time. They reflected, they realized that they got their butts handed to them pretty much in the information domain, and they focused on more training, building up new units, and refining their TTPs. So then that takes us to 2014, Ukraine, and Crimea. There they were really prepared, and that's where we've seen some of the most aggressive campaigns combining cyber and information operations to date. So in Ukraine, one of the pretty scary examples was Russia setting up messaging campaigns on social media, like trying to influence the international community like they had in 2008. They also started to send messages directly to soldiers and their families. They also used open source information and PAI to collect on these soldiers and their families and friends and identify them. And then they would send social media messages to the family and friends of the soldiers on the battlefield saying, hey, your soldier is going to die. All these things, while also sending out text message campaigns to the soldiers on the battlefield, telling them to run. And then that was shortly followed by artillery fire. So it was that combination of targeting the cyber domain, information operations, and then physical fires as well. So we haven't seen as much reporting on that recently since February with the current events, and I think it's just a matter of time before we find out either it's happening if it hasn't been reported, or they may have backtracked and not been as effective as they had in 2014, like we've seen with some of their other parts of this military campaign. So when we look at China, it's something that we don't hear as much about because it's not at our front door, and that's on purpose. So China they're not avoiding information operations, they're doing quite a bit. And what we hear about here at home is just the censorship that they have domestically in China, but they are running pretty large scale information operation campaigns through their entire region, through all of Indo-PACOM, and then Africa as well, to try to position themselves as a viable alternative to the US and their leadership. So this is one of the things we haven't quite seen as much ties between cyber and information warfare from China as we have from Russia, but it's something that they are going to continue to operate just below our attention, just below what Russia is doing, so that we don't turn our attention to them and they can continue to go on unquestioned. So another situation in which we see information operations making a pretty big impact is through international terrorism and then domestic and international extremism. So through international terrorism, we see things like ISIS using the internet to spread propaganda, conduct international recruiting, all those things that we kind of hear a lot about. And then I'm sure most people in the room are familiar with the international response to that, with the US response to that through JTF Ares. One thing that we don't hear about as much, I'm sure people in this room probably know about it, but the broader population doesn't think about this, is that they were able to use those information operations for tactical successes as well. So we saw that when, with their pretty disgusting and widely acknowledged beheading videos, they used that not just to stir up outrage in the international community, they were able to take a handful of very gruesome acts and use them to intimidate the Iraqi army into abandoning their posts before ISIS even had to engage them physically. So, and then when we look at domestic and international extremism, it's a threat here at home, and it also ties with the activities of other nation states. So one example of that is through domestic white nationalism and white supremacy far-right organizations that are conducting they're doing paramilitary training and things like that at home, and you think that that's just something that's here in America. We've also seen them actually work with Russian groups that have the same goals. So one of those is the Russian Imperial movement. It's a far-right movement in Russia that does not believe in the legitimacy of the current Russian government. They believe in only the legitimacy of the Russian monarchy, despite the fact that there are no known heirs to the Russian monarchy. So they conduct a lot of paramilitary training at home and encourage local citizens to take up arms and conduct all of this and participate in their paramilitary training. The Russian government knows about these groups, and they pretty much have an understanding that as long as they don't actually conduct any violence or do protests or things at home, they'll let them be and continue their operations. But these groups have reached out to U.S. far-right celebrities in the far-right space and encourage them to come over and present at their events and also take part in their paramilitary training. They also have brought over members of white supremacist and nationalist groups over to the U.S. And have tried to use some of those same channels of getting in our social media, getting starting close groups, pretending to be someone else online, and making it seem like they're just a normal, everyday American, maybe another soldier that you work with or another Marine, or someone like that, in these message boards and meme boards, and slowly radicalize people over time through memes, through social media. So another one, COVID, we've been talking about a lot of different successful disinformation campaigns. COVID is another one where we saw multiple nation states kind of work together and amplify each other's messaging. So this was one of China's most successful international disinformation campaigns so far. They were retweeting disinformation from their public accounts. There were Chinese politicians, currently sitting politicians, who were posting saying that the COVID didn't originate in Wuhan. It was created by the U.S. and released there. Then that information, those tweets were retweeted in 55 different languages, and then they were picked up by other nation states as well. So they were picked up by Iran and retweeted, and Russia and retweeted. And when you see that cross-sharing of information and that sharing of narratives and amplifying each other's narratives, that just increases the legitimacy in the minds of the people that are reading that information. So that kind of brings us to, we understand the problem, we understand the big picture. Information warfare is a threat, and we know that it is tied in with the cyber operations and the electromagnetic spectrum. That's a lot of times the delivery method. It's also how some of that reconnaissance is conducted, some of that information is collected, and how they find their targets for these campaigns. So we need to do a better job at training for these things across the US DoD. So what we're seeing from our adversaries is that they don't need this training at 29 Palms or NTC or JRTC because they're just going to go into their neighboring countries and do it. They can do it in their backyards and they're not concerned about the authorities. Whereas our units understand that this is a problem and need to compete against our adversaries, but they don't have any place to do it without doing it live for the first time. Whereas we respect laws and authorities a lot more and want to make sure that we're not going to have unintended impacts to average citizens. They don't have those homes, so they're out there getting their reps in, and we need a safe, closed-loop environment where we also can get our reps in and train like we fight. So today, most of the training that we have is still kind of at the walk phase. Some of it is at the crawl phase, but not quite as far as running and not nearly as well developed as we can do in the other domains. So I'm appreciative for the training I had. It trained me to do some really cool things, but when I was taking part in that training, a lot of times you just kind of had the skeleton of something. You had maybe an empty map town with no role players in it, and that's really not what our soldiers and Marines, all of our service members need. They need that high fidelity, first, you need classroom training, then you need map town, then you need to be able to do like force on force and get up to that level to sharpen your skills. I'll hand it off to Melissa.
Great, thank you. So like Amanda said, we need realistic training. So training has been outdated and our adversaries are quickly outpacing us. So every time we come up with a really new cool capability, the enemy is already advanced. So we need to be able to get our units and organizations to crawl, walk, run, and we've been supporting the military with that out from Skytech Cyber Training Center. We actually helped the 915th Cyber Warfare Battalion, their first ECT train on an integrated information warfare environment. So bringing in their OCO teams, DECO teams, and information operations units to do a really cool integrated information warfare exercise. And so units also need to be able to train on the tools that they're going to be using in the real world environment. So it's like getting a PowerPoint on how to use a rifle, and then your command general say go forth and prosper without actually being able to use that said rifle in a safe space before you're deployed. So being able to interoperate with third-party tools in a safe environment to train on those tools is going to be crucial. So who knows SEMA? Does anyone here know what SEMA stands for? Okay, so how many? So cyber electromagnetic activities. So that is an Army term, which is why I was not surprised that everyone raised their hands. So when you hear the word cyber electromagnetic activities, a lot of people think it's just cyber and EW. It is not. There is psychological operations, military deception, SIGINT, and a bunch of other areas, even under psychological operations and information operations, that we need to consider. And being able to bring units together from different mission areas like cyber, EW, IO, to train together as a team and train as they fight is going to be so important. So, having a platform to train on, being able to bring in the tools that you're going to bring in a real world environment, and then bringing in, allowing for coordination across multiple different task areas, it is great. And that is something that the combat training centers and other training centers around the U.S. really need to focus on. Another really important part of it is understanding how kinetic effects impact the information environment. So if a plane goes down, an Air Force plane goes down in enemy territory, and someone tweets out, an important influencer in enemy territory tweets out that the pilot has been stolen, that did it? Was he stolen or was he not stolen or kidnapped? We need to kind of see how that would impact the information environment and how our public affairs teams, our information operations teams, our cyber operations teams would respond to something like that in the information environment. So here's best practices, at least in our opinion, of what organizations should be looking at when training their information warfare teams, whether that's just cyber, just IO, just EW. It's relevant as it encompasses the entire information environment. So, being able to have home station training is obviously crucial so that users can get their cyber reps in like you would at the gym every single day. For remote trainees, it's equally important, especially as we've seen with COVID, where not everyone can be at the same place at one time. Being able to remote in through a platform and train together is very important. Obviously having the ability to do small or large scale exercises, whether it's 1 year or quarterly, bringing in different units that normally wouldn't train together is huge as well. Right now we have an exercise going out from Scatatuck where there are 2 different organizations within the SOC community that are training together, which is really exciting and something we need to see more of. So within our, if I were king for a day, this is kind of what I would want to see. I would want to see the front-facing websites in a training platform. So Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, name another one, I don't know. I'm a millennial, I'm not a Gen Zer, so I don't know them all. TikTok. There we go. Replicated news websites with different various biases. So CNN, Reuters, Fox, BBC, to just understand the different perspectives that they are sharing. And then also being able to pull in real news sites. The ability to support different languages in a training environment is obviously going to be very important. So if there is an expeditionary cyber team, being forward deployed to somewhere close to Russia, they're going to want to understand Russian social media outlets like BK, for example, and then understand, the biases that you see in RT and other Russian news sources. Non-standard communications is also really important. Having, a place where intel units can sort of go down those rabbit holes. So having like a sort of World of Warcraft situation where you are, meeting up and you're having a clandestine meeting with somebody else and you're able to share information securely. So all of that. And then behind that, it all sits on a functioning cyber page. So, having virtual machines plus hardware in the loop. So ICS SCADA systems, for example, being able to plug and play, try to hack a water treatment plant, try to defend a water treatment plant, all in a safe, closed loop environment so you can really, truly train as you fight without the concern of touching the actual internet and doing something that you will probably regret. And so, obviously exercise management is going to be important as well. So the white cell capability, they're going to need to have a very user-friendly white cell capability where all of the content is hosted, all of the personas are hosted, and so that they can kind of push out, the scenarios and injects either scheduled or in real time. And so having a kind of Wizard of Oz behind the curtains, the brain of the training environment, that's really what's going to make the training super beneficial. I think that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Quite a few questions, but I'll just keep it simple. So I guess my question comes with, does deep fakes play a key role into like what you're talking about? And so it seems like technology, meaning the capabilities of the hardware, is a limitation, and then also like training with teams. I guess can you expand on how that would be beneficial? Because I guess I think in like more of a SWAT setting, normal teams train together so they know within their own like fire team what they're specialized in. How would having another team be beneficial in a situation like trying to fight against electromagnetic or anything dealing with like public facing?
So having having other teams and the rest of the units that are going to be working together, it's really critical to do that specifically in a pre-deployment setting. So if we look at how the entire Minecraft trains out of 29 homes, before a deployment, they will bring together different pieces from all of these different skill sets right before they deploy together, and they will all need to practice doing their operations out there. And so historically, it's been really difficult for skill sets that are in the information environment or in the cyber domain to demonstrate that value out of 29 homes. Blow something up at 29 palms, that's not a problem, but how am I going to do a cyber attack out there? It's just a bunch of unwired mountain villages. So having all these people able to play together makes a pretty big impact. Back to your part about deepfakes, so that is something that's really important that we're seeing. Like you could have a deepfake of a politician or something like that. So typically, we've seen people in exercises use YouTube replica to post like legitimate messages from their PAO or from the State Department, things like that. And if deepfakes were introduced, that could have a pretty significant impact on how those units and their PAOs would be able to respond or not. Did I answer your question?
So super interesting discussion. Appreciate that. So a lot of what you guys kind of covered here at the end sounds quite similar to the persistent cyber training environment. Are you guys familiar with that crew and their mission with it?
Yeah, so we're familiar with with PCTE. So actually, there is a connection between PCTE and the Scatatuck Cyber Training Center. Yeah, so PCTE, they do like a lot of the virtual machines and things like that. I think it's Cyber Yankee that they connected to, the Scatatuck. So we're the prime contractors out there, so we're familiar with the systems out there.
We also haven't seen with PCT any strong social media I/O focused components. We are patiently waiting for that because obviously that's something we want to help them get after. It hasn't been a real requirement yet, but once it is, we want to get involved.
I asked it because we had a meeting, the Subject Matter Innovation Companions from the Summary that I'm part of. We had a meeting with those guys just yesterday and got a lot of capability overview and heard some of their pain points and some of their successes. So it's I'd love to hear it, and if there's any way that we could be a linkage to help try to feed some good information back to them.
Great. Let's do. Yes, background.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you said you do have some different customers, like Soft, et cetera, that use this now.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of lessons learned from that. And I guess regular armies haven't really utilized this because they don't know it exists potentially. What are their thoughts, and how can we get the rest of the DoD forces who aren't using something like this involved to, like you said, like involved the PCTE and some of the other events that have been successful to this point, but not everybody realizes we have the capability.
So the biggest way to get units to start training for this is to make it a requirement, or else it's going to fall by the wayside with like the already super long list of readiness requirements that commanders have. Like pretty much anyone we talk to is like, yeah, that is a big deal. That is super important. But understanding the importance is very different than scheduling the time to take your unit out to practice or to moving in another unit and convincing them of the importance of why they should put training dollars to this. So we have to hold our, that has to be something that we are held to training to, or people aren't going to do it. So the 915th actually, they are one of the conventional units that we work with the most. If you guys aren't familiar with the 915th, they're the first SEMA team the SEMA Center for Electromagnetic Activities and then also Information Operations. They're tasked with supporting the maneuver commanders with doing that. And that's the first Army unit that's been tasked with supporting conventional maneuver commanders with that specific mission. So that is their training objectives. They have to do that, and they're the ones who have taken full advantage of platforms like this, and also impress upon the brigades that hey, you have to operate these things with places like JRTC, because before they had access to something like this, they would go to JRTC to do their evaluation exercises, and then just kind of sit around while the rest of the brigade looked at them like a bunch of useless nerds, when they actually had a lot that they could offer.
And then you asked about current customers besides the SOF community, not going to name names, but SOF is one of our biggest customers. With Army, 915th is obviously one of them, but Army Futures Command is another. So we've supported their Cyber Blitz exercise in 2019 as well as MDO Live in 2021. And those are really cool exercises and great examples of bringing in different teams with different mission sets to join together. For Cyber Blitz, we had the I2Qs, which Eric, I'm sure you know about them, and then some OCO and DECO teams. We helped validate tools and technologies that they wanted to use in real world environment to A, practice safely, and B, is it the right tool for us? So that's another customer that we work with.
I think we only have one more minute, and then the last question.
Just to add one more question. So is this only limited to like government? Does it also include like private sector, commercial teams, and also would be exposed to this with a lot of companies international?
Yeah. Yes. We're not ITAR restricted. We have our ITAR registration. So we've supported international archive partners before. And so, but commercial certainly, as you think about the financial sector, healthcare sector, and the attacks that they've witnessed and ransomware. So, yeah, we'll hang die out here if anyone has